everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of Trans Stupid, the show where I take a look at the wonderful world of LGBTQIA+++ news because stupidity is intersectional. It's been a very long time since I said that. I know that I've taken a little bit of a break on my channel, but over the last couple of weeks, we've seen an awful lot of quite bizarre news coming out of the LGBTQIA+ numbers community, and I think this is probably the best format to really address a lot of what's going on. Now, I'm going to start this week by talking about the main story across the entire year from the looks of things, due to the amount of coverage this one person has received. I mean, just look at Pink News. I'm sure that ContraPoints would say they had a cringe obsession with this particular person, but you know, maybe she's just selective in her outrage. But this, of course, is JK Rowling. Now, I have done a video expressly on Rowling in the past where I discussed how I didn't find anything that she's really been doing to be particularly transphobic. I know there's a lot of people within the trans community, however, that very, very strongly disagree, but each to their own. I personally think she has done absolutely nothing wrong. But there has been so much outrage about everything to do with Rowling, and it really seems to be having an impact not just on her, but on just people who generally agree with her. Now, over a week ago, Insider reported on a best-selling children's author being sacked by her publishers after tweeting her support for JK Rowling. Now, what was the support that she actually did? Well, it was just retweeting something that my friend Fiona Lander tweeted about with the hashtag I stand with JK Rowling. That was it. But in this wonderful world of 2020, this is enough to get somebody cancelled. And this is why I really want to talk about this. According to Insider, Julian Phillips, a Glasgow-born best-selling children's author, has been sacked from her job as one of several writers who write under the pen name Erin Hunter. Her removal from the team that writes animal fantasy series, including Warrior Cats, Survivors, and Bravelands, comes after she tweeted her support to JK Rowling after the Harry Potter author's controversial comments about trans people. Philip tweeted hashtag I stand with Rowling on the 7th of June. In a statement on Sunday night following the decision to remove her by publication companies HarperCollins and Working Partners, Philip wrote, I am disappointed that the hard work and professional attitude I've brought to my work for HarperCollins and for Working Partners counted for nothing in the face of an abusive mob of anonymous Twitter trolls. It is concerning that my concerns about women's legal rights and spaces have been presented as transphobia. And this is an accusation that has been allowed to stand by my former employers. Working Partners has received numerous tweets from angry fans calling for them to fire Philip. Eventually she was. Chris Snowden, the managing director of the company, said in a statement, Erin Hunter is not a single person, but a diverse team of creatives and writers. We recently became aware that Julian Phillips had associated the Erin Hunter pen name with her personal views on Twitter, thus associating them with the whole collective. In light of this situation, the decision was taken to no longer work with Julian Phillips. The decision taken was not in direct response to the nature of Julian's personally expressed views. Now, they say that this was connected to this particular pen name of Erin Hunter, but the tweet in question clearly is under Julian Phillips' own name. So it's quite difficult for them to really make the argument that this is being represented as their entire brand when it's clearly just one person expressing their view. Now, this is important to talk about because when we're hearing from the likes of AOC and Owen Jones and all the woke progressives that cancel culture doesn't exist and it's just the privileged trying to defend their views from being held to account. Someone like Julian Phillips is a fairly small name. I certainly hadn't heard of her before all of this happened. And yet she still was removed from her job just for tweeting in support of Rowling. That should concern a lot of people on either side, really. This is someone just expressing a view. She hasn't said anything particularly transphobic. She's not calling trans women men, for example. She's not calling for abuse. She's not doing anything the likes that we've seen being aimed at JK Rowling herself, and yet she was still removed from her job just for expressing that view. There is a lot of power from this community that seems to make the case that they are consistently discriminated against and they are the oppressed class. You know, this is a community that has companies such as Disney writing to our government asking them to make sure that they pass self-identification laws. You know, it's very hard to say that you are this weak group when you have some of the most powerful businesses on your side. And of course, this isn't the only time that pressure has been put on in the literary world for people to disavow JK Rowling. For example, the non-binary power couple that is Fox and Dowell, yes, that is their real names, left their publishing firm after they refused to basically bow to the whim of the trans mob. According to a statement, the clients decided to leave because we did not meet their demands to be re-educated to their point of view. And that is exactly it. All of this seems to be about making sure that you agree with the right side. And if you are of the wrong side, effectively you are fair game. I find this absolutely terrifying, that this just seems to be brushed aside as though it's just the worry of the privileged, as they always say. It's the normal people who are most likely to have their lives ruined by something like cancel culture. JK Rowling is a billionaire. She's not really in any trouble of actually losing her income, but it's the people who agree with her that are at the most risk. And of course, this isn't the only time Rowling has been in the news the last week. I mean, obviously, the likes of Pink News are going to be always talking about her no matter what. But this is a fairly interesting headline. JK Rowling's golden handprints in Edinburgh have been vandalised with ... a trans pride flag. Now, look at that picture. Yeah, the vandalism is clearly not the trans pride flag, but rather it is the red paint there to symbolise blood, effectively saying JK Rowling has blood on her hands for expressing the kind of views that she has. Now, this isn't the first time that complaint has been labelled against Rowling. Jacob Tobiah a couple of weeks ago tweeted, JK Rowling, I want you to know there is blood on your hands. By challenging the womanhood of trans women in front of millions, you are culpable. You have chosen to sustain a world where trans women are brutalised and murdered with impunity. Once again pushing the narrative that someone like Rowling expressing the views that she does immediately leads to trans murders. Now, I did a video a few weeks ago on the Black Trans Lives Matter movement where I discussed that the vast majority of the trans murders that we've seen in the US over the last 18 months have been at the hands of black men and not so much TERFs and not really people who would have been in a position to be influenced by, let's just say, Julie Bindel. Like, these are really extreme views that are being put out there. This is not a cute gesture. This is trying to shame someone and hold them responsible for things which are simply not anything to do with them. Making the idea that if you speak out against the mob, you are implicit in murder. No, that's not the case at all. A lot of these murders of trans people might not even have anything to do with them being trans, let alone them having been influenced by the author of Harry Potter. I find these to be absolutely ludicrous examples, and I really, really wish that the trans lobby would calm down with this kind of rhetoric. But speaking of Jacob Tobiah, I wanted to discuss something which I came across only today, really. It's a few years old at this point, but it's so special. It's so special. I just have to talk about it. And I thought, why not fit it in with Trans Stupid? Because that is certainly what it is. Like, let's just check out this headline. Why can't my famous gender non-conforming friends get laid? That is the real concern nowadays. You can't have sex. Don't worry, there is a seal at the end of this, I assure you. According to the author Meredith Talasan, Alok Menon and Jacob Tobiah are two of the most publicly visible gender non-conforming femmes I know. But if you think all this would land them on a date, you'd be wrong. And nobody is more puzzled than me as to why such obvious catchers are having dating problems when so many clamour for their attention. Well, let's see what kind of dating tactics these two are using. What I learned during the social experiment that followed is that Jacob and Alok, like many gender non-conforming femmes, live in a world where admirers applaud them for their radical politics on social media, and people they're attracted to associate with them because of their slay-worthiness and social capital, but refuse to make love to them, or at least fuck them well. As Alok set my Tinder account, I became confused when they asked whether I wanted to set my gender as man or woman. This all happened in those dark days of autumn 2016, before Tinder added 37 new gender options to the app. Since I'm on the femme side of non-binary, I thought it would be obvious that I wouldn't label myself as a man. OMG, I'm going to switch my gender to woman too, so I can look at straight guys, Alok exclaimed as they picked up their phone, and Jacob followed suit. I vaguely known that most of their prospects had been gay-identified men, but it didn't occur to me that if given only 2 gender choices, they would need to pick man on Tinder, so they would get gay instead of straight matches, along with the rare bi and pan guys. I personally felt that dating straight-identified men was the right choice. My experience has been that straight guys are more willing to experiment than GNC folk, than gay guys, because their attractions aren't as socially defined and don't come with a lifestyle attached. Straight boys are so cute, Alok said as they and Jacob started swiping, their exaggerated intonation managing to feel both sincere and ironic. Maybe we should get electrolysis and take hormones, Jacob added in jest, perking up at the bevy of new options. Now, apparently, whilst the author got lots of matches on Tinder, Alok and Jacob complained they couldn't get matches in the first place, even when they resorted to swiping right on almost everyone. And even with the few matches they did get, guys didn't respond when they messaged. It became apparent that my brand of gender non-conformity was somehow more attractive to men than Alok and Jacob's, and as the night wore on, I found myself sincerely befuddled. The looks I gave in my pictures were just as funky as theirs, with my partly shaved head and my geometric bodysuit plus oversized platform heels, or a close-up of me sans makeup that showed off my strong brow and flat chin in all their androgynous glory. I wondered aloud whether Alok and Jacob weren't getting matches, if there was some algorithmic mystery at hand, whether guys were racist against Indians in Alok's case, or if they found Jacob's bright makeup too intimidating. So let's just kind of back up a little bit. So you have 2 non-binary male people, I'm being very careful with my words here, who have identified themselves as being women on Tinder, and they then get upset that men who are into women don't find them attractive. Just to avoid any kind of confusion, this is what they look like. Yeah, it should be blatantly obvious, but I'm gonna have to spell this out because I have seen this kind of rhetoric on how difficult it is to date whilst being trans being pushed, and there is such a huge difference between what people might think is being talked about and what is actually being talked about. Now, just to point out the obvious here, no, a straight guy is not going to be attracted to either of these. They're just not. Straight guys are into women. They're into the female form. So yeah, these people are not going to be attractive to the average straight person. In fact, I would say almost any straight person, really. They do not look feminine at all. They look like men, just wearing a bit of makeup and a dress. In fact, even the way that they dress when you look at pictures of these two is not really the best kind of style for anyone. Like, these are people who really want to, subvert society's expectations, but that comes with a caveat that maybe society is not going to want to have sex with you. I mean, that should be obvious again. But when we often talk about trans, it can often be about the difficulties that maybe trans men and trans women face. Now, certainly, I can attest to how difficult dating has been for me. I mean, if I was to use a online dating app, for example, if I put in the bio that I am trans or anything like that, I would instantly get chasers and people who are only interested in sex. If I removed that, then I run the risk of being accused of being sneaky and hiding who I really, really am. Now, thankfully, I don't have to worry about that anymore because I now have a loving boyfriend, but there is still issues when it comes to dating as a trans person, and I don't just mean that for trans women who pass. That could be trans women who don't pass very well either, but they're still kind of putting in an effort. That even someone like that is very, very different to someone like Alok and Jacob. It feels very disingenuous to try and say that there must be some underhanded reason, or what's more, to expect people to have sex with you. Like, the article consistently points out, all these people who hang out with them and none of them want to put it in them. Like, what a crime. I'm sorry, but nobody should be fresher to having sex with these people. Maybe they just like to hang around with them. Maybe they agree with the politics that they're pushing. Maybe that's about it, and they just don't want to put it in them. It's wrong that these kinds of articles come out. These are still narratives that are pushed on a daily basis. Of course, this is an example from a few years ago. However, it's just so absurd I had to bring it up. But going back to the present day, it turns out that saying the phrase, only females get cervical cancer, is transphobic. According to Pink News, UK's biggest cervical cancer charity shuts down disgustingly transphobic lie that only females get cervical cancer. Joe's Cervical Cancer Trust says everyone with a cervix should have access to support and information about cervical cancer and smear tests, including trans and non-binary people, after a disgusting Twitter campaign by transphobes. So why was this campaign pushed? I've seen a lot of people talk about this particular hashtag, which is hashtag only females get cervical cancer. But all of this actually came about because of a Twitter user who was banned for simply tweeting that phrase, which is absurd. And so when people saw that, they decided to make it a hashtag. That was the reason why. But it's still being pushed as though this is a campaign against trans people. Now, this article from Pink News does a lot of work in pointing out that, well, trans men and non-binary people can get cervical cancer as well. And that should be obvious because they are biologically female. Like, of course a trans man is biologically female. He wouldn't be a trans man if he was biologically male, would he? And these are the same kinds of people who say, well, we're not denying biological sex. And yet, by saying that, well, it's wrong to say that only females can get it, by saying, well, a trans man could get it as well, because a trans man is biologically female, that right there is you denying biological sex. And they also try and add in a point about trans women being able to get cervical cancer as well. According to the Canadian Cancer Society, if you've had bottom surgery, you may be at risk of getting a cancer in some of the cells used down there, depending on what kind of tissues were used. However, there isn't really a lot more information on what cervical cancer for a trans woman would even be tested, anything about that, except for, well, you might be able to get cancer down there. And yeah, you can get cancer in virtually any part of your body, so it wouldn't surprise me if you can indeed get cancer in that area. But is it the same as cervical cancer that female people get? I am not 100% sure because I am certainly not a medical professional. However, it seems very vague from what they're saying. I mean, cervical cancer is normally just about the cervix and not the kind of constructed one that you get following GRC. But what's really interesting about this is just the phrase that only females get cervical cancer is considered hateful. And whilst trans activists might try and point out, well, this was being pushed as a way of attacking trans people and this is like a hate fact, this actually just makes them look more and more ludicrous. Like, it's a generally accepted statement by the vast majority of people that only females would get cervical cancer. By trans people pointing out that just even saying that is hateful, it's kind of like the same trap as adult human female. I mean, the vast majority of people understand that's what a woman is. But when you say that simple statement is a hate fact, it can cause a lot of trouble. And it seems that you're losing your mind a bit when you're trying to push that narrative. And speaking of ludicrous hate incidents over the last week, how about this motorist who sped over a rainbow crosswalk in Vancouver, with police calling it a hate gesture? So you might have seen a lot of cities around the world are having these walkways with the pride flag painted over them. Cars drive over them on an almost minute basis. And yet someone doing a skid on it was considered a hate incident. Now, there isn't a lot of information as to why this person decided to skid. However, it looks ludicrous once again, and a lot of people have pointed this out on social media. One would say that if you want to avoid these kinds of incidents, you probably shouldn't be painting a pride flag on the road which cars drive over constantly and very easily get damaged. But who really thinks nowadays? And the last thing that I want to talk about today is someone called Judith Rose. Now, You might be wondering who this person is. Well, she has exploded in popularity literally over the last couple of days, going from about 700 followers on Twitter to nearly 30,000. Similarly, her TikTok has exploded, and that was really where she kind of came from. So she is a non-binary but uses they and she pronouns, so I'm just going to use she here. And she is apparently a Trump supporter. That's why I want to talk about this. A non-binary Trump supporter. Welcome. So having had a look at Judith's history, you will see that there is a lot of what you would call SJW-style behaviours. She has been a huge advocate of Black Lives Matter. She has been doing videos on white privilege. She's also criticised Donald Trump on a hell of a lot of occasions. But then a couple of days ago, she released this video.
This might be the hardest pill to swallow of the century. Understand this. I am a registered Democrat. A week ago, I was trolling this man's shit. If you had asked me to spit in his face and piss in his coffee, I would have done it for free. I would have done it for free. So try to imagine what I've seen that would make me flip the switch that hard. You guys know what a double agent is? Have you heard of the phrase, keep your friends close, put your enemies closer? What the news has been burying is that he's actually been talking about going after the human trafficking. Once I realized that the news was actually kind of fake, and Hillary was in fact lying, I had to consider the possibility.
That has made her a little bit of a star on right-wing Twitter. I mean, she's a non-binary person who's now on Trump's side. I can see where the appeal of that lies. But I do think it's important to get the kind of whole context of where this change has come from. Has she now become a conservative? I don't personally think so. One of the things that I've noticed in a lot of her videos is that she talks a lot about conspiracy theories. For example, she often mentions Operation Paperclip, and this appears to be a huge revelation for her, despite it being common knowledge that the US employed Nazi scientists. These aren't quite earth-shattering revelations, but she reads a lot into these things, and so her general belief is that Trump is trying to stop global child abductions, and this is why the media is going very, very hard against him. In fact, she seems to believe that Trump is almost a double agent, getting close to people like Jeffrey Epstein as a way of being able to stop them. Now, I don't know whether any of that is accurate. I'm not necessarily into conspiracy theories myself, so I can't talk about that. But I do think before everyone kind of jumps on board and says like, oh yeah, she's new on the MAGA train, she hasn't really said anything about any kind of policies which she would support under Trump. Personally, I don't think that she would either. I just think that this is someone who has talked a lot about conspiracy theories, but it might be quite interesting to actually speak with her myself and see what has actually changed. Maybe that would give a clearer idea, but it's still interesting that this is the first time I've actually come across a non-binary person who now says they support Trump. That is news, at least, even if the reasons might be not quite what everyone thinks. Now, I did promise a seal video, so of course here is a seal. Here is the seal. Look at him. Look at the seal. And there we go. I had to throw in a seal video. But thank you all for sticking with me over the last couple of weeks. I know, aside from seal of approval, my content has kind of dried up. However, I do have a lot more time now because I'm taking a bit of a sabbatical from work. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. You can also support me on Patreon and Subscribestar, which would really help me out during this time because I'm not really going to have a lot of income coming in apart from what I'm able to get through YouTube. So I would really appreciate it. Of course, if you can't, don't worry about it. I still appreciate your support if you like and share my videos and subscribe. That's more than enough. But thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.
And a special thank you to Alex Meadows, Alyssa Morris, Aurora T. Silver, Casey Adolphson, Dan Norman, Ada Meadows, Finella Cooney, James C. George, James UK, Janine Karen, Jess, Joe, Kim Vandry, Latin Creature, Moy Felicita, Nova B, Rezi, Ricardo Jose, Steve Hendricks, Tennessee Barfly, The Poor of Rizzo, Zoe, Stefan Hansen, Laisha, and all of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar.